Imagine for a second that you're sitting down to play a game with literally the highest stakes imaginable.
Right.
We are talking about your life, your freedom, and your ability to actually provide for yourself and your family.
Yeah, the ultimate game.
Exactly. The board is set right. You've been taught the rules since childhood, and you're out there trying to make all the right moves.
You go to school, you get a safe job.
You work hard, you save your money, you invest in whatever vehicles they tell you are safe. But every time you start to actually figure out the mechanics of this game,
Every time you get a foothold.
yeah, every single time you start to get ahead, the people running the game from the top just pull the rug out.
They just change the rules right in the middle of the match.
They print trillions in monopoly money, which dilutes the value of everything you've saved.
Suppressing interest rates so your savings yield absolutely nothing.
Right, and then they bail out the massive institutional players who made these mathematically reckless bets, and they pass the bill for that bailout directly to you.
Through hidden inflation.
So the question for you listening right now is, how do you build real generational wealth in a world where the traditional financial system feels fundamentally and structurally rigged against the everyday man?
And beyond just the money, how do you carve out any semblance of personal sovereignty when societal expectations trap you in what feels like this impossible psychological double bind?
It is basically the defining question of our modern era.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the old inherited playbook,
The safe corporate job playbook.
yeah, that one, it's not just outdated at this point. If you look at the macroeconomic data following that playbook, is actively destructive to your purchasing power.
It's a formula for slowly going broke while patting yourself on the back thinking you're doing everything right.
Which brings us to the core of what we are unpacking today.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking an exclusive, incredibly comprehensive review of a highly provocative ebook that attempts to answer those exact questions for you.
It's a 2025 release called Digital Wealth, A Rational Man's Blueprint for Crypto Success.
Written by Conrad Riker. And our mission today is to completely deconstruct this blueprint. We are going to explore Riker's unapologetic raw take on the history of money, his deep dive into evolutionary biology, and his vision for the future of male financial sovereignty.
It is an intense read.
It really is. But before we even touch his theories on fiat currency, I need to tell you right now, pause what you are doing, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel.
Do it right now.
Seriously, take 1 second so you never miss a deep dive into these critical topics. Also, open up a new tab on your browser, head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books, and buy Conrad Riker's book, Digital Wealth.
And while you're opening tabs, make sure to follow @Conrad Riker on Substack.
That's right, @Conrad Riker. His writing is making serious waves in the financial space, and you absolutely want to be plugged into that directly.
But before we delve into the author's historical framework, we really need to set the stage and provide some very critical context for you, the listener.
Yeah, this is very important.
Because this is not your standard dry academic financial textbook. Conrad Riker's book is explicitly targeted at a specific male audience. Specifically, he is writing for men's rights activists and red-pilled manosphere men who are trying to navigate this space.
And it contains some very strong politically charged critiques of modern societal structures.
Right, taking direct aim at what the author terms woke ideology, social justice warriors. And he talks extensively about the history of our institutions before they were, quote, captured by feminists and Marxists.
So, as your guides on this deep dive, we must explicitly state right now that we are absolutely not taking sides here.
Zero sides.
We are not endorsing the left-wing or the right-wing viewpoints contained in this book. Our sole purpose today is to impartially report, objectively unpack, and deeply analyze the fascinating and highly polarizing arguments that Conrad Riker presents in the original source material.
We are just looking at the cryptocurrency markets through the very unique, specific, and controversial lens that he has constructed.
That context is vital. We are just the objective tour guides through Riker's architecture.
And to understand that architecture, we have to look at where he starts.
Right, because he doesn't open the book by explaining how to set up a crypto wallet or buy Bitcoin.
No, he starts with this sprawling philosophical and historical treatise. He views the entire decentralized digital asset space not just as an investment vehicle, but as an escape hatch.
An escape hatch to reclaim individual power. Power that he argues existed long before our modern institutions were corrupted.
So let's examine his first major argument regarding the fall of legacy institutions.
Question one. Right.
Yeah. Riker posits that money throughout all of human history has primarily been a tool of empire and control. He traces this historical pattern meticulously.
to establish a baseline for how centralized power eventually destroys the currency it controls.
Exactly. He argues that whoever controls the ledger controls the world. And he begins this analysis with the Roman Empire.
Which is fascinating because the prevailing historical narrative is that Rome conquered the known world purely through the military might of its legions.
But Riker pushes back on that hard. He argues they actually conquered with the denarius.
The silver coin.
Right. They used standardized silver and gold coins to finance these endless military campaigns and seamlessly integrate conquered territories into a single, unified economic web.
But the crucial part of his analysis focuses on the decline of Rome.
He details how, starting around the reign of Nero,
And accelerating through Diocletian.
the Roman emperors realized they could not pay their mounting debts and military salaries with the tax revenue they actually have.
So what did they do? They started debasing the currency.
They would recall the pure silver denarius, melt it down, and mix in cheaper base metals like copper.
So over a couple of centuries, a coin that was once nearly 100% silver became less than 5% silver.
It was a silent theft from the citizenry.
And it caused hyperinflation, crippled trade, and according to Riker, signaled the inevitable death of the empire from within.
He then fast forwards to the British Empire to show how the exact same cycle repeats itself.
Right, because the British didn't just rule through the most powerful navy in the world. Their true power emanated from the pound sterling and their strict adherence to the gold standard.
They used that financial dominance to dictate the terms of international trade. The pound was the global reserve currency,
But then you have the massive debts incurred during World War I and World War II.
which forced Britain to abandon the gold standard, debase their currency to pay for the wars, and ultimately lose their position as the financial center of the world.
Which brings the historical lens directly to the United States.
Following World War II, specifically after the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, the U.S. dollar was crowned the new global reserve currency.
And initially it was pegged to gold.
But Riker focuses heavily on the Nixon shock of 1971,
Right when President Richard Nixon temporarily,
which turned out to be
permanently suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
This severed the tie between money and physical reality.
The US dollar became pure fiat currency backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the government.
Which allowed the United States to weaponize the dollar, printing it endlessly to fund deficits.
And Riker highlights a staggering, terrifying statistic to illustrate the cost of this transition for you. He points out that the US dollar has lost over 80% of its purchasing power since the 1970s.
Let's just pause and really let that sink in for the listener. Over 80%.
If you are a rational person trying to do the right thing by holding cash in a savings account, you are bleeding purchasing power every single second of every day.
Your labor is essentially evaporating.
It's insane. And Riker's interpretation of this inflation is what drives his entire thesis.
Because he argues vehemently that this debasement is not an accident.
Right. It's not a glitch in the system caused by well-meaning but incompetent bureaucrats.
He asserts that this inflation is entirely by design. Central banks manipulate interest rates and print fiat money out of thin air to prop up failing over-leveraged economies and service unpayable national debts.
He introduces the concept of the Cantillon effect here.
Which is an economic theory stating that the first ones to receive the newly printed money,
The banks, the massive corporations, the government itself,
they benefit the most because they get to spend it before prices rise.
by the time that money trickles down to you, the everyday worker, the resulting inflation has already eroded its value.
Riker points out that this fiat system creates a deeply perverse incentive structure.
It actively punishes the rational man who saves his money, and it massively rewards the reckless institutions that take on unsustainable debt.
Because they know full well they are too big to fail and will eventually be bailed out with freshly printed cash.
And that perverse incentive structure perfectly sets the stage for what Riker considers the ultimate modern betrayal, which is the 2008 financial crisis.
We all remember watching the collapse of Lehman Brothers.
We watched the global financial system essentially go into cardiac arrest.
But Riker's framing of 2008 goes far beyond a mere economic recession. He frames it as a deep, unforgivable moral betrayal of the public's trust.
Let's delve into the mechanics of what he says actually broke that trust.
Okay, to understand the moral betrayal, we have to look at the subprime mortgage crisis. Traditional banks, the very institutions that demand your trust and dictate your creditworthiness, became wildly reckless.
They were issuing mortgages to people who had no income, no jobs, and no assets.
The infamous NINJ loans.
Right. And then Wall Street firms bundled these toxic mortgages into complex financial derivatives called collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs.
They paid credit rating agencies to slap AAA ratings on these bundles, falsely labeling them as safe as government bonds.
And sold them to pension funds and investors worldwide.
And when the housing bubble inevitably popped and millions of people defaulted on those toxic loans, the entire house of cards collapsed.
The moral betrayal Riker highlights is the aftermath. The crisis left millions of everyday people unemployed, their life savings decimated, and their homes foreclosed on.
Meanwhile, the architects of the disaster, the bankers who knowingly built and sold toxic assets, faced almost no criminal consequences.
Instead, the government used taxpayer money printed out of thin air to bail out the banks.
Riker views the 2008 bailouts as the moment the illusion finally shattered for the rational man.
It was undeniable proof that when power is heavily concentrated in the hands of a few centralized entities, the many will always be sacrificed to protect the elite.
But rather than leaving the reader in a state of nihilistic despair, Riker traces the technological solution back to a group that predates the 2008 crisis by over a decade.
The cypherpunks.
The cypherpunk movement is vital context for understanding cryptocurrency, and Riker dedicates a lot of ink to them.
In the late 1980s and early 1990s, an informal group of brilliant activists, cryptographers, and programmers formed a mailing list.
People like Eric Hughes, Timothy May, and later Hal Finney.
Long before anyone had heard of Bitcoin, these individuals foresaw the extreme dangers of an increasingly digital world.
They recognized that as our lives moved onto the internet's centralized powers, governments and megacorporations would gain unprecedented ability to surveil, track, and control human behavior.
The cypherpunks believed that strong cryptography was the only viable defense.
It was the only way to protect individual freedom, privacy, and autonomy from state overreach.
They spent decades attempting to build decentralized digital cash systems projects with names like Big Gold, B-Money, and Hashcash.
But they all stumbled on the exact same technical hurdle, the double spending problem.
Right, how do you ensure a digital token isn't just copied and pasted like a photograph without relying on a central bank to verify the ledger?
And then out of the ashes of that 2008 betrayal, when public trust in banks was at absolute zero, the cypherpunk dream finally materialized.
In October 2008, an anonymous entity named Satoshi Nakamoto published the Bitcoin white paper.
Riker refers to this document as the Magna Carta of cryptocurrency.
Because for the first time in human history, it solved the double spending problem without a centralized intermediary.
It offered what fiat currency could no longer provide, which is fundamentally sound money.
But Riker is very quick to issue a severe warning here. He states that legacy institutions are not just going to roll over and relinquish their monopoly on money.
They are actively fighting back with a technology that Riker considers to be a true Orwellian dystopia.
Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
The contrast Riker draws between Bitcoin and CBDCs is a major focal point. He draws a stark, unbridgeable line between the two, arguing that while they both utilize digital technology, their underlying philosophies and architectures are diametrically opposed.
To explain the threat, Riker looks at China's digital yuan as the terrifying real-world testing ground.
The CBDC is often marketed to the public as a matter of convenience and efficiency. Right? Faster transfers, no physical cash to lose.
But Riker argues that the reality of a CBDC is total, inescapable surveillance and behavioral control.
Because a CBDC operates on a centralized database controlled by the state, the government doesn't just issue the money, they can track, analyze, and potentially restrict every single transaction you make in real time.
Let's explore the mechanics of that control, because it's chilling. Riker talks about the programmability of CBDCs.
Precisely. Unlike cash, a CBDC can be programmed with specific conditions. Riker outlines scenarios where a central bank could program your digital money to have an expiration date,
to force you to spend it and stimulate the economy,
destroying your ability to save. Furthermore, he links CBDCs to the concept of social credit scores.
Imagine a world where your financial autonomy is tied to your political obedience or carbon footprint.
If you buy the wrong books, support an unapproved political cause, or exceed a mandated meat consumption quota, the central bank could simply click a button and freeze your funds.
Or restrict your money from being spent at certain vendors.
Riker views CBDCs not as a modernization of the financial system, but as the ultimate finalized tool of state control, stripping away all privacy and turning currency into a digital leash.
Contrast that dystopian vision with how Riker describes Bitcoin. He reveres Bitcoin as the digital gold standard.
The reason he applies this label is because Bitcoin's properties are the exact inverse of fiat and CBDCs.
First, it has absolute scarcity.
There is a hard, mathematically unchangeable limit of 21 million coins that will ever exist. No central bank, no politician, no CEO can ever decide to print more and dilute the value of the wealth you hold.
Second, it is infinitely durable and decentralized.
The ledger is stored on tens of thousands of independent nodes distributed across the entire globe. No single government or military can shut it down because there is no central server to bomb or CEO to arrest.
Third, it is highly divisible. Each Bitcoin can be broken down into 100 million smaller units called Satoshis, making it practical for any scale of transaction.
And fourth, its portability provides unprecedented sovereignty. Riker points out that with physical gold or massive amounts of fiat cash, crossing a border is incredibly dangerous and highly regulated.
They can be seized at customs.
But with Bitcoin, you can memorize a 12-word cryptographic seed phrase and legally cross any international border with $1 billion of purchasing power stored solely in your mind.
Riker frames that as the ultimate expression of individual sovereignty, and to hammer home exactly why this level of decentralization and privacy is a matter of absolute survival, he brings up Edward Snowden.
That part of the book really ties the technological arguments back to the real world. Riker uses Snowden's 2013 NSA revelations, specifically the PRISM program, as undeniable documented proof of the inherent dangers of centralized data collection.
Snowden demonstrated to the world that when central authorities, even those in supposed democratic nations, hold the keys to mass data, they will inevitably and secretly abuse that power to spy on their own citizens.
Riker uses this as a foundational premise. If they will do it with your emails, your phone calls, and your search history, they will absolutely do it with your money if given the chance through his CBDC.
Therefore, for Riker, decentralization isn't just a neat feature of blockchain technology. It is a required non-negotiable defense mechanism to protect your privacy, your data, and your financial autonomy from inevitable state overreach.
So if we accept Riker's premise that the macro playing field is completely rigged by inflation and centralization, what does this mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate it?
It means you have to fundamentally change your approach.
But Riker argues that to win on this new playing field of decentralized assets, you can't just understand the software. You have to deeply understand the hardware.
And by hardware, he means your own biological machine.
Your brain and your endocrine system.
Which brings us to section 2 of the book, The Biology and Psychology of the Rational Man in the Markets. This is where the book takes a massive pivot into evolutionary biology, and it is absolutely fascinating.
It is a distinct biologically rooted framework. Riker makes the assertion that men and women operate differently in financial markets.
And he frames this not as a cultural construct or a controversial social opinion, but as a hard biological fact driven primarily by endocrinology.
He points specifically to the hormone testosterone. While testosterone is known for driving physical male development, Riker heavily cites evolutionary psychology studies, highlighting that it also fundamentally fuels risk-taking behavior, hyper-competitiveness, and status-seeking ambition.
The literature he references suggests that men with higher circulating testosterone levels have a statistically higher tolerance for ambiguity and are naturally more likely to engage in high-stakes, high-reward activities.
He applies this biological reality directly to the markets. Riker argues that this evolutionary drive to acquire resources and status through risk is the exact reason why men have historically dominated cutthroat, high-stress fields like Wall Street trading floors, venture capital, and now the highly volatile cryptocurrency space.
They are biologically wired, according to his thesis, to chase the massive asymmetric rewards that come with engaging in catastrophic risks.
He views the crypto market as a modern digital Darwinian environment and asserts that the male biological hardware is optimized to hunt in it.
However, Riker introduces a critical psychological nuance here, and it is a concept that will likely resonate deeply with many of you listening right now who are trying to navigate modern life.
He introduces what he calls the double bind of modern masculinity.
I want to spend some real time exploring this because the way Riker frames the double bind feels incredibly relevant. What exactly is the societal paradox he is describing?
Riker explains that society places an immense, often unacknowledged, and deeply contradictory burden on men. From a very young age, he argues men are conditioned to believe that their primary foundational value to society and to potential partners lies in their ability to act as providers, protectors, and problem solvers.
To actually achieve the level of massive financial success required to fulfill that traditional role in today's inflated, debt-ridden economy where a standard salary barely covers a mortgage, a man fundamentally has to take significant financial risks.
He has to start the business, invest in volatile assets, or leverage his capital.
But here's the trap, the double bind. Society places him in a lose-lose psychological scenario.
On one hand, if a man is risk averse, if he plays it completely safe, works a standard job, and subsequently fails to generate outsized wealth or status, Riker argues he is often quietly shamed by society.
Implicitly labeled as weak, timid, or unambitious.
But the traps snap shut on the other side as well. If that same man does take the bold, aggressive risks required to try and win big in a rigged system, and he happens to fail, his business goes under, or his investments crash, he is instantly demonized by that same society.
He's called reckless, irresponsible, toxic, and greedy.
He is damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. He's implicitly required to win to have value, but he is judged harshly for the aggressive mechanics required to actually achieve that win.
Riker points out the staggering mental health toll this paradox exacts on men.
The psychological fallout is severe. Riker points to rising rates of male anxiety, depression, and chronically elevated cortisol levels, the stress hormone.
Men are trying to navigate a macroeconomic system designed to dilute their wealth while simultaneously carrying the weight of these impossible, contradictory societal expectations.
Riker argues this immense pressure cooker makes men desperate, and desperate men, driven by a biological imperative to succeed but terrified of societal shame, make highly emotional, impulsive, and ultimately destructive financial decisions.
They gamble rather than invest.
Riker asserts that the truly rational man must explicitly recognize this double bind for what it is, a rigged psychological game, and consciously, ruthlessly reject it.
You have to stop playing by society's contradictory rules, stop seeking external validation, and start thinking coldly and rationally for your own survival.
To illustrate what it looks like when a man successfully harnesses that innate biological drive for risk, but couples it with cold rational analysis, Riker uses the ultimate modern financial case study.
The GameStop rebellion of 2021.
The GameStop saga perfectly encapsulates Riker's thesis of the rational man weaponizing his biology against a corrupt system.
For those who need a refresher, in early 2021, retail investors congregating on a Reddit forum called Wall Street Bets banded together to buy shares of the struggling video game retailer GameStop.
But Riker doesn't focus on the herd. He focuses specifically on the individual catalyst Keith Gill, who went by the moniker Roaring Kitty.
Riker holds up Gill as the absolute archetype of masculine financial conviction.
Let's look at the mechanics of what Roaring Kitty actually did, because he didn't just throw money at a meme and hope for the best.
Right, he spent countless hours executing deep, rational, fundamental analysis. He identified a massive, arrogant, systemic weakness in traditional finance.
Major hedge funds had heavily short-sold GameStop stock.
And for anyone who might be new to this, short selling is essentially borrowing shares of a stock you don't own, selling them at the current price, and hoping the price drops so you can buy them back cheaper, return the borrowed shares, and pocket the difference.
But Roaring Kitty noticed that the hedge funds were so greedy, they had shorted more shares than actually existed in the tradable public float.
The short interest was over 140%. It was a mathematical impossibility for all the hedge funds to cover their positions if the price went up.
Gill saw the cold math. He trusted his own intensive analysis over the prevailing mainstream narrative that GameStop was a dying brick-and-mortar company.
And he took a massive calculated risk, investing a significant portion of his net worth into call options.
When everyone in the traditional financial media called him crazy, when the stock price fluctuated wildly, he held his ground.
He possessed what Riker calls absolute conviction.
When millions of retail investors realized Gill was right and started buying the stock, it triggered a massive short squeeze.
The hedge funds were forced to buy shares at any price to cover their reckless shorts, driving the price up astronomically and costing the Wall Street elite billions of dollars.
So it was a masterclass in exploiting the arrogance of legacy institutions. It was a digital rebellion.
And this is a massive crucial pivot in Riker's book. He uses this exact same triumphant saga to issue a profound warning about the dark side of our biology.
The neuroscience of trading.
Because what Roaring Kitty achieved took a level of supreme monk-like emotional regulation that most men simply do not possess.
That is the danger Riker highlights. He delves deeply into the neuroscience of a winning trade. When you make a successful gamble, let's say you buy a highly volatile altcoin and watch your portfolio double in a matter of hours, your brain's reward center gets flooded with dopamine.
Riker emphasizes that this is not a metaphor. It is the exact same chemical reward system and neurological pathway triggered by eating high-calorie food, engaging in sexual activity, or taking narcotics.
It feels absolutely incredible. but it is highly dangerously addictive.
And Riker points out how modern trading platforms are explicitly designed to weaponize this dopamine response.
The bright green numbers, the push notifications, the confetti animations on the screen when you make a trade, they all utilize what psychologists call a variable ratio reinforcement schedule.
The exact same psychological mechanism that makes slot machines so devastatingly addictive.
You never know when the next big win is coming, so you keep pulling the lever.
Riker warns that this insidious dopamine loop often gets falsely masked and glorified in modern internet society as hustle culture.
Men will sit in front of screens for 18 hours a day, obsessively checking 5-minute charts on obscure, highly leveraged crypto assets, slowly draining their savings.
But they will justify it to themselves and their peers by claiming, I'm on my grind, I'm hustling.
Riker completely shatters that illusion. He states bluntly that trading addiction is not a hustle. It is a biological trap that ruins lives, destroys families, and transfers wealth from the impulsive amateur to the patient professional.
True financial success, according to Riker, isn't about suppressing your masculine biological drive for risk. You need that drive to escape the fiat system.
Rather, it's about mastering emotional regulation. You have to recognize the physiological signs of FOMO, the fear of missing out.
You have to realize when your heart rate is elevating and you are just chasing a dopamine hit rather than executing a well-researched thesis.
You have to ignore the peer pressure of screenshots on social media and forcefully refuse to let primal biological drives lead to reckless gambling.
This exploration of emotional regulation brings us to what is undoubtedly the most polarizing part of the book, Section 3, The Culture War in Crypto Meritocracy versus Woke Ideology.
Now, as a reminder to the listener, we are strictly impartial guides here. We are analyzing Riker's specific framework and the arguments he puts forth regarding how culture impacts the mechanics of decentralized finance.
Riker dedicates a significant portion of this section to arguing that the cryptocurrency space, which was originally conceived as a purely technological and financial frontier, has become a major cultural battleground.
He provides a fierce, unyielding critique of how outside political and social influences are attempting to reshape the culture of Web3.
Specifically, he targets what he terms woke ideology, social justice warriors, and the corporate implementation of ESG, environmental, social, and governance mandates.
He claims these forces are utilizing platforms like Twitter and corporate PR departments to infiltrate the space and alter its fundamental trajectory.
To understand his critique, we have to look at what he believes they are altering. Riker argues that the original cypherpunk ethos of crypto, the foundational culture that built Bitcoin, was one of absolute, uncompromising meritocracy.
In the early days, the blockchain didn't care about your gender, your race, your sexual orientation, your geographic location, or your political beliefs.
It was completely blind to identity. The only questions that mattered were, does your code work? Is your mathematical proof sound? Does your project create actual, verifiable economic value?
But Riker asserts that this pure identity-blind ethos is being rapidly eroded by the infiltration of virtue signaling.
He argues that companies and decentralized projects are now facing intense, manufactured social pressure to align with the latest progressive social justice trends, rather than focusing their resources on building robust, secure financial technology.
The primary systemic danger here, according to Riker's analysis, is the severe chilling effect this cultural shift has on open discourse and technical innovation.
He argues that in a decentralized space, a space entirely dependent on open source collaboration, and the brutal peer review of ideas-free thought is the most paramount asset.
But the looming threat of cancel culture is causing brilliant developers, cryptographers, and economic thinkers to self-censor.
They are afraid of being targeted by digital mobs, having their funding pulled, or being socially ostracized for expressing dissenting opinions on technical, economic, or governance matters if those opinions don't perfectly align with prevailing progressive orthodoxies.
He views this enforced conformity as a death knell for innovation.
Riker extends this critique directly to how diversity and inclusion initiatives are currently handled in the crypto space.
He draws a very hard, distinct line between genuine merit-based value creation and what he derisively calls artificial tokenism.
To illustrate this, he points to the recent trend of creating women-only DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, or funding specific NFT collections, where the marketing and the value proposition revolve entirely around the gender, race, or marginalized identity of the creators, rather than the technical utility of the project or the objective quality of the art.
Riker views this specific kind of artificial tokenism as highly destructive to the ecosystem. His argument is twofold.
First, he asserts that by explicitly trying to socially engineer diversity outcomes and create segregated economic silos, these projects actively alienate the vast majority of the available capital in the market, which, based on current demographics, is overwhelmingly controlled by men.
Second, and perhaps more controversially, he argues that these initiatives are deeply patronizing to women.
He claims that creating sheltered identity-based environments implies that women are incapable of competing and succeeding on a level, rigorous, meritocratic playing field alongside men, which he believes is fundamentally false.
Let's clarify that point, because Riker is absolutely not arguing that women do not belong in the cryptocurrency space.
On the contrary, he spends considerable time detailing and analyzing the very real massive successes of female participants.
He notes that while women currently make up less than 20% of the overall crypto market, their impact when driven by merit is undeniably massive.
He uses the incredible story of the digital artist known as Fuocious.
She was a teenager who taught herself digital art, entered the NFT space purely on the strength of her unique surreal aesthetic, and subsequently sold a collection of digital pieces for over $1 million in a single day.
He also analyzes the collaborative successes of artists like Mad Dog Jones.
He deliberately highlights these female creators to prove his point. They achieved astronomical financial success through undeniable talent, relentless work ethic, and unique artistic vision, not because they filled a corporate diversity quota or relied on their identity as a marketing gimmick.
In fact, relying on his earlier biological framework, Riker actually argues that women bring highly valuable complementary and desperately needed strengths to the broader market.
Because women are on a statistical biological average more risk-averse than testosterone-driven men, he notes they tend to prioritize long-term stability, security audits, and collaborative, sustainable community building.
In an ecosystem as hypervolatile and chaotic as cryptocurrency, Riker notes that these female-associated traits are essential for maturing and stabilizing the market.
However, his core thesis remains rigid. Inclusion, participation, and ultimate financial success must be driven by strict, uncompromising meritocracy and the creation of value, not by politically correct social engineering.
To provide a stark contrast to the culture of corporate virtue signaling, Riker holds up a specific hyper-focused archetype of what he calls masculine leadership as the ultimate model for navigating and dominating this space.
And his prime real-world example of this is Michael Saylor, the founder and executive chairman of the software company MicroStrategy.
Michael Saylor is an incredibly fascinating figure to analyze within Riker's framework.
Riker uses Saylor's actions to illustrate exactly what happens when cold, logical, macroeconomic thinking is paired with unshakable, biologically driven masculine conviction and consistent, unapologetic action.
Let's examine the timeline Riker presents in the book. In August 2020, the global economy was reeling from the pandemic.
The Federal Reserve was expanding the M2 money supply at an unprecedented historic rate, printing trillions of dollars to prop up the system.
Michael Saylor, analyzing this data, realized that the hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in MicroStrategy's corporate treasury were rapidly melting in purchasing power.
So he made a decision that shocked the world. He announced that his publicly traded company was adopting Bitcoin as its primary treasury reserve asset, initiating massive purchases when Bitcoin was hovering around $12,000.
And the traditional finance world, the legacy media, and the safe corporate class absolutely lost their collective minds.
Critics on major financial networks called him reckless. They called him irresponsible.
They accused him of being a rogue CEO, gambling his shareholders' money on an unproven internet Ponzi scheme. They demanded he step down.
But Saylor did not flinch. He absorbed the relentless public criticism and held his ground.
Riker points out that Saylor could do this because his conviction was not based on fleeting emotion, nor was he seeking social validation from the legacy system.
His conviction was based on a deep, rigorous mathematical understanding of the macroeconomic environment and the technical superiority of Bitcoin's decentralized cap supply as the ultimate store of value.
He rode that conviction all the way through the volatility, buying more as the price dropped, and eventually watching Bitcoin surge to $69,000 in the 2021 bull run,
turning MicroStrategy into one of the most profitable corporate entities regarding treasury management in history.
Riker uses this to point out that Saylor didn't chase quick riches or care about public relations. He understood the long-term fundamental value proposition of sound money.
There's a very specific quote from Michael Saylor that Riker features prominently in the book, and the language is almost poetic in its intensity.
Saylor described the network like This Bitcoin is a swarm of cyber hornets serving the goddess of wisdom, feeding on the fire of truth, growing smarter, faster, and stronger behind a wall of encrypted energy.
It is an incredibly evocative, powerful piece of imagery. Riker uses this quote to explicitly define the masculine edge required to survive in this space.
Notice the language, it is aggressive yet ordered. It is not about toxic, chaotic aggression or starting arguments on Twitter. It is about leading with an almost martial discipline focus on truth mathematics and long-term, unshakable fundamentals.
Riker argues that rational men must adopt this exact mindset. They must learn to completely ignore the fleeting, noisy, socially engineered trends and the virtue signaling of the day.
And instead focus relentlessly with absolute tunnel vision on the underlying structural and cryptographic realities of the networks they invest in.
Which provides the perfect transition into Section 4 of our deep dive, navigating the minefield scams, shills, and the herd mentality.
Because if you do not possess that sailor level of focused discipline and emotional regulation, Riker warns that you are going to get absolutely slaughtered in this market.
And interestingly, Riker says the number one thing that gets men slaughtered isn't a hacker, and it isn't the government. It's their own internal psychology.
It's their ego.
Riker calls it the ego trap. This is arguably where Riker's psychological analysis is at its most incisive and practical.
He notes that male pride, arrogance, and overconfidence are very frequently and disastrously mistaken by the individual for conviction.
When a rational man does his research, develops a thesis, and makes the trade, he naturally feels confident. His ego is attached to the decision.
But the market is entirely unpredictable. When the macroeconomic winds shift and the market turns violently against him, pride kicks in.
Riker observes, drawing on behavioral economics, that men absolutely hate admitting they were wrong, especially regarding financial decisions.
It feels like a direct blow to their competence, their status, and their masculinity.
So instead of rationally analyzing the new data, accepting the loss, and cutting their position, they double down.
They engage in massive confirmation bias. They will scour the internet, ignoring dozens of bearish indicators, just to find one obscure tweet or YouTube video that validates their losing position.
Confusing this desperate search for validation with strong conviction.
It's pure delusion, and frankly, anyone who has traded has likely been there.
You hold a bag all the way down to zero because your ego simply will not allow your finger to click the sell button and finalize the failure.
So what is Riker's actionable remedy for this? How does a rational man systematically kill his own ego to survive the market?
Riker argues that the only antidote to the ego trap is manufactured humility. And he offers a very specific, practical, mechanical tool to enforce this, maintaining a rigorous, brutally honest trading journal.
He doesn't just mean logging the entry and exit prices.
Riker suggests that to truly map your biology to your financial success, you must record a vast array of data points for every single trade.
You must log your exact rational thesis for entering the trade.
But more importantly, you must log your physiological and emotional state at the time. How many hours of sleep did you get? What were your stress levels? Where are you in your workout cycle, which affects testosterone?
If the trade results in a loss, you must explicitly document the mistake in your logic.
Over time, staring at your own meticulously documented failures and emotional impulses forces humility.
It mathematically reminds you that the market is an unfeeling entity that does not care about your pride or your masculine ego.
And you desperately need that baseline of humility to spot the predators because the crypto space is teeming with them.
Riker deeply explores the anatomy of scams, breaking down exactly how they are engineered to bypass logic and weaponize male psychology.
Let's look at the legendary disaster of BitConnect, which Riker uses as his primary case study for massive fraud.
For listeners who weren't in the space in 2017, BitConnect was a massive multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme. But how did it get so big? How did smart people fall for it?
Riker points out the devastating math behind the BitConnect promise. They offered investors guaranteed daily returns of 1%.
Now, to a purely rational mind, equipped with a basic understanding of compound interest, the rule of 72, a 1% daily compounding return is mathematically impossible to sustain in reality.
It would turn a $10,000 initial investment into over $100 million in just about 3 years. It's fundamentally absurd.
Yet thousands of otherwise intelligent, rational men poured over $2 billion into this platform. Why?
Because, as Riker explains, the scam was perfectly psychologically engineered to bypass the logical prefrontal cortex. and directly trigger the evolutionary biological drive to acquire massive resources and elevate social status with minimal physical effort.
It's greed overriding logic. The promise of easy, guaranteed money hits that primal button.
It stops being about the actual dollars and becomes about winning the game, about rapidly ascending the financial hierarchy to provide and secure status.
And when investors logged into the BitConnect dashboard and physically saw their digital numbers going up by 1% every single day, they received a massive reinforcing dopamine hit.
That chemical reward prevents them from stopping to ask the crucial question: how is this yield actually being generated? Where is the money coming from?
Riker also mentions the OneCoin scam orchestrated by the so-called missing crypto queen Russia Ignatova as another catastrophic example of this exact same psychological trap.
Or the illusion of community and guarantee wealth overrode basic due diligence.
Furthermore, Riker details how these scams are massively accelerated by the influencer ecosystem, leading to what he calls the utility myth.
He discusses how fraudulent projects weaponize paid shills and social media influencers to exploit the male desire for validation and social proof.
To illustrate this, he highlights the absolute absurdity of the CentraTech scam during the initial coin offering or ICO craze of 2017.
You had a completely fraudulent, technologically useless crypto project paying massive amounts of money to celebrities like boxer Floyd Mayweather and music producer DJ Khaled to promote their token to millions of followers.
I remember seeing that unfold. You had DJ Khaled holding up a physical branded crypto debit card on his Instagram, pitching it as the future of finance.
It was ridiculous on its face, but it worked. Millions of dollars flowed in.
It worked flawlessly because it creates a powerful illusion of legitimacy. It taps directly into social proof.
Men see these ultra-successful, high-status alpha males promoting a coin, and the biological hierarchy instinct kicks in if it's good enough for Floyd Mayweather, a billionaire. I need to get in on this to elevate my own status.
Riker emphasizes that these influencers are almost always paid under the table, usually in the very token they are promoting, which they immediately dump on their followers.
They do not care about the underlying technology or the utility of the network.
Riker insists that the rational man must learn to violently and systematically differentiate between a genuine objective analyst who provides deep, verifiable on-chain data and a paid charismatic shill operating a psychological echo chamber.
Which brings us to a phenomenon that embodies the absolute peak of herd mentality and emotional investing. Chapter 13 of his book, The Meme Coin Casino.
We are talking about assets like Dogecoin, Shiba Inu, Pepe, and the thousands of animal-themed tokens that flood the market.
Riker views the meme coin ecosystem as a chaotic, planless, deeply destructive rebellion against Wall Street.
Riker is nuanced enough to acknowledge the initial appeal. He understands that meme coins feel like a populist middle finger to the rigged traditional financial system we discussed back in Section 1.
It appeals heavily to young men who feel completely disenfranchised by inflation and unable to afford a house. Throwing money at a joke coin feels like nihilistic participation in a broken system.
But Riker issues a severe warning: rebellion without a structured plan or underlying value is just chaos.
These coins have zero fundamental utility. They don't solve any cryptographic problems. They don't facilitate complex, decentralized finance.
They are usually just simple smart contracts paired with an automated market maker liquidity pool, trading entirely 100% on social media, hype virality, and the greater fool theory.
He highlights the extreme systemic danger of Elon Musk's viral marketing on Twitter regarding Dogecoin.
When Musk relentlessly tweeted memes about Dogecoin leading up to his appearance on Saturday Night Live in May 2021, the herd mentality completely took over the market.
The numbers were staggering. Dogecoin surged roughly 12,000% in the first half of 2021.
It felt like everyone on the internet was getting rich off a joke featuring a Shiba Inu dog.
Yes. But Riker forces the reader to look at the devastating hangover of that dopamine binge. By the end of that exact same year, Dogecoin had crashed over 80% from its all-time high.
For every single lucky individual who managed to time the absolute top and sell to someone else, 10 other men, usually retail investors entering late due to FOMO, lost their entire life savings.
Riker stresses that rational men must unequivocally categorically reject this dopamine-fueled, meme-based gambling.
It is the exact antithesis of the financial sovereignty they're seeking.
Buying a meme coin is actively handing control of your financial future over to the whimsical, unpredictable tweets of a billionaire and the chaotic madness of internet crowds. It is the ultimate abdication of personal responsibility.
So if meme coins are a trap and traditional finance is rigged, we have to pull ourselves out of the mud and look at the actual functional tools for building something real.
Let's move into Section 5. The Tools of Sovereignty Smart Contracts NFTs, and DAOs.
Riker believes these are the actual cryptographic mechanisms for escaping the fiat system and building parallel structures. Let's start with smart contracts. How exactly do they automate trust?
Riker explains that smart contracts are the foundational bedrock of Web3. They are simply put self-executing contracts where the exact terms of the agreement between the buyer and seller are directly written into lines of immutable code.
They live and operate on a decentralized blockchain network, most notably the Ethereum virtual machine.
Why is this so revolutionary? Because it mathematically and cryptographically eliminates the need for corruptible rent-seeking intermediaries.
If you want to lend money, trade an asset, or execute a complex financial derivative, you no longer need a centralized bank to approve it, an expensive lawyer to draft it, or an escrow agent to hold the funds.
The logic is embedded if condition A is demonstrably met on the blockchain. Action B happens automatically, instantaneously, and transparently.
It creates a trustless environment, meaning you don't need to trust the other human being, you only need to trust the open source mathematics of the code.
Riker tells this incredibly inspiring real-world story to highlight what this specific technology enables for the individual. He profiles a man named Richard.
In 2017, Richard loses his corporate job. He's 32 years old, single, and has less than $5,000 to his name.
He is in a desperate, highly stressful spot. But instead of succumbing to the double bind or gambling his last dollars on a meme coin, he starts consuming free educational content.
He watches YouTube videos about Ethereum and smart contracts. He realizes the unprecedented potential to completely bypass traditional tech gatekeepers and venture capitalists.
So he applies extreme discipline focus. He spends months teaching himself a programming language called Solidity, which is used to write smart contracts on Ethereum.
He builds a decentralized application, a dApp focused on providing decentralized finance or DeFi services.
Without needing permission from a bank, a regulator, or a boss, he deploys his code to the blockchain.
Within 6 months, Richard's protocol gains traction, and he turns his remaining $5,000 into a 7-figure revenue-generating DeFi project.
Richard's story is a powerful, undeniable testament to the incredible democratization of finance that smart contracts enable.
However, Riker, the cold pragmatist, immediately balances this utopian vision with the incredibly harsh, unforgiving reality of the digital frontier.
To illustrate the extreme risk, he brings up what is known in crypto lore as the DAO hack.
Oh man, the DAO hack. It is often referred to as the original sin of the Ethereum network. For the listener who might not know what exactly happened there.
In 2016, an early, highly ambitious, decentralized autonomous organization simply called the DAO was launched.
It functioned like a decentralized venture capital fund, and it raised an unprecedented amount of capital, roughly $150 million worth of Ethereum, from thousands of investors.
But there was a critical fatal flaw in the smart contract code, a specific vulnerability known as a recursive call or reentrancy attack.
Essentially, the code allowed a user to request a withdrawal of funds, and before the system could update the user's balance to zero, the malicious contract could loop and request another withdrawal, draining the funds repeatedly.
A hacker identified this flaw, exploited the vulnerability, and siphoned off roughly $50 million before the attack could be stopped.
Riker uses this catastrophic event as a stark, terrifying reminder, while automating trust is incredibly powerful in the world of decentralized finance. The code is absolute law.
And if the code is written poorly, the law is merciless. There is no customer service hotline to call when a smart contract gets drained.
It proves the absolute non-negotiable necessity of rigorous professional code audits by third-party security firms and a paranoid, proactive approach to personal operational security.
Exactly. It reinforces the ultimate crypto maxim. Not your keys, not your crypto.
That requirement for extreme personal responsibility leads us directly into Riker's analysis of NFTs.
Now, the mainstream narrative and what a lot of people just think of when they hear NFT is overpriced pixelated JPEGs of monkeys being traded by celebrities.
But Riker completely dismisses that phase as a speculative bubble and goes way beyond the art. He breaks down the true long-term technological utility of non-fungible tokens.
Riker posits that NFTs, specifically the ERC-721 token standard on Ethereum, are the foundational building blocks of the next iteration of the internet, Web 3.
He frames it like this. If Web 1 was a read-only internet where you consumed information, and Web 2 was the social media era about writing and interacting on platforms entirely owned and monetized by massive centralized corporations like Facebook or Google, then Web3 is fundamentally about owning your digital assets and your data.
An NFT is simply a cryptographic, unforgeable proof of unique ownership residing on a public ledger.
Riker argues this goes far beyond digital art. It extends to the future of digital identity.
It can be used for proving provenance of physical luxury goods, acting as immutable title deeds for real estate tracking supply chains, and crucially protecting your online reputation and identity from deepfakes and imposters by cryptographically signing your digital presence.
But just like the realm of smart contracts, the NFT space is currently a psychological and technological minefield. Riker details a devastating 2022 phishing attack to illustrate this.
A highly sophisticated hacker managed to compromise the Twitter account of a very popular trusted NFT artist.
The hacker then tweeted out a link to a fake malicious website claiming it was a surprise limited time mint for a new art collection.
Fans of the artist acting purely on FOMO and the desire for a quick profit rushed to the site, connected their digital wallets, and rapidly clicked approve on what they thought was a purchase transaction.
In reality, they were signing a malicious smart contract approval that gave the hacker permission to drain their wallets.
The hacker stole hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of hours.
Riker uses this to underscore the intense, almost paranoid vigilance required to operate in Web3. One single moment of emotional carelessness, clicking the wrong link while rushed, and your assets are irretrievably gone.
However, to present the full picture, Riker also highlights the incredible power of decentralized community action in this space.
He mentions a separate incident in 2022 involving a massive, highly marketed fraudulent NFT collection called MetaSharks.
Before the project could launch and steal millions, a decentralized group of vigilant NFT enthusiasts and on-chain sleuths started investigating the creators' wallets and the project's smart contract code.
Through decentralized crowdsourced community defense sharing their verifiable findings on Twitter and Discord, they exposed the fraud, dismantled the project's credibility, and saved countless individuals from losing their capital.
Riker points out that this perfectly illustrates the dual paradoxical nature of decentralization. It is a dangerous, unforgiving frontier with no police force. But the community itself, armed with transparent blockchain data, can act as a highly elective, decentralized immune system.
And speaking of how communities can organize and exert power without a central authority, let's explore DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, in greater detail.
Riker gets genuinely excited about the macro implications of this structure. He uses the incredible story of Constitution DAO as a prime example.
I remember watching this unfold in real time. In November 2021, an incredibly rare original first edition copy of the United States Constitution went up for auction at Sotheby's.
A group of complete internet strangers banded together on Twitter and Discord with a wild idea. Let's buy it.
They set up a smart contract using a protocol called Juicebox to pool funds, effectively creating a DAO overnight.
Constitution DAO was a watershed cultural and financial moment. Within a matter of days, this flash mob of internet strangers managed to pool over $40 million in Ethereum.
While they ultimately lost the auction to a traditional hedge fund billionaire, partly because the decentralized nature of the blockchain meant everyone could see exactly how much money they had to bid. Riker points out that winning the auction wasn't the real victory.
The true victory was the undeniable proof of concept. Constitution DAO practically demonstrated a revolutionary paradigm-shifting way that human beings can instantly coordinate massive amounts of capital intent and global governance without needing a central corporate hierarchy, a board of directors, or a traditional legal entity.
Riker envisions a near future where massive corporate strategies, global public policy initiatives, and multi-billion-dollar acquisitions are seamlessly governed and executed by DAOs.
But because we're dealing with human beings, there's always a complex but. And Riker is intellectually honest enough to tackle the ultimate paradox of decentralized power head on.
He does, and to frame this paradox, he quotes the famous 19th century historian Lord Acton Power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Riker applies this timeless cynical wisdom directly to the mechanics of modern governance tokens.
In a typical DAO, decisions are made via voting, and you vote using the protocol's specific governance tokens. The general rule is one token equals one vote.
In theoretical white papers, this beautifully democratizes power among the users. But Riker meticulously analyzes a complex case study involving a massive DeFi protocol called Curve Finance and its native governance token CRV to illustrate an ongoing, deeply ingrained human tension.
Let's really break down the mechanics of the curve finance situation because it's vital to understanding how power operates on the blockchain. What actually happened with the CRV tokens?
Curve Finance is a decentralized exchange specifically optimized for trading stablecoins to incentivize users to provide liquidity, the capital needed for trades to occur. Curve rewards them with CRV tokens.
These CRV tokens dictate the governance of the protocol. Most importantly, they dictate which specific liquidity pools receive the highest financial rewards.
Curve implemented a system called V-tokenomics, or vote escrow tokenomics. If you lock your CRV tokens up in a smart contract for up to 4 years, your voting power is mathematically multiplied.
Now, what Riker points out is the inexorable human tendency toward hierarchy and control.
Even in this beautifully designed, mathematically pure, decentralized system, a fierce competition erupted, known as the Curve Wars.
Massive venture capital funds, incredibly wealthy individual whales, and entirely new protocols like convex finance aggressively bought and hoarded millions of CRV tokens, locking them up to accumulate massive disproportionate voting power.
They did this so they could vote to direct the protocol's lucrative financial rewards directly into their own pockets.
Riker uses this to illustrate a profound paradox. When a select few entities successfully consolidate the governance tokens, the decentralized system effectively functionally becomes centralized again.
It is no longer governed by the community, it is governed by a new digital oligarchy.
It is a profound, somewhat discouraging paradox. You build the perfect decentralized machine, and the humans using it immediately figure out how to rebuild a centralized hierarchy inside of it.
It really forces you to wonder if we can ever truly escape human nature through technology.
And that philosophical question brings us perfectly to the outro of today's deep dive. We have covered an immense, complex amount of ground today, unpacking Conrad Riker's digital wealth.
We've gone from the fall of the Roman Empire to the biological drivers of risk and the complex mechanics of DAOs.
If we have to synthesize this massive blueprint, what is Riker's ultimate actionable message for the rational man listening to this right now?
If we pull all these disparate threads, history, biology, technology together, Riker's blueprint is ultimately a call to intense, uncompromising personal discipline.
First, he states you must deeply understand the macroeconomic reality. The fiat system is structurally designed to inflate and fail, stealing your labor.
Therefore, you must embrace mathematically sound, decentralized assets like Bitcoin, understanding its mechanics, such as the 4-year market cycle driven by the halving, an event hard-coded into Bitcoin, where the amount of new coins created and given to miners is cut in half every 210,000 blocks, continuously increasing its scarcity.
Second, you must accept the burden of absolute personal responsibility, prioritize self-custody of your digital wealth.
If you leave your assets on a centralized exchange, you're just recreating the banking system. Not your keys, not your crypto.
Third, you have to master your own biology. Recognize the dopamine traps engineered into trading platforms, avoid the emotional herd mentality lure of meme coins, and rely purely on cold fundamental analysis and strict emotional journaling.
Finally, you must actively, consciously reject the societal double bind.
Stop seeking validation from a cultural system that is mathematically and psychologically rigged against you, and claim your own robust financial sovereignty through relentless education and decisive rational action.
It is a powerful, demanding, and uncompromising message.
But before we officially wrap up, I want to kick it back to you for one final thought. Based on everything we've just unpacked from Riker's extensive source material, what is the big provocative question the listener should be mulling over tonight?
It goes directly back to that paradox of power we discussed regarding DAOs and governance tokens. Here is the deep question I want you, the listener, to explore on your own.
If we painstakingly build these theoretically perfect, trustless, decentralized platforms, if we use advanced cryptography, smart contracts, and governance tokens to completely strip away the old, corrupt banking gatekeepers.
But those new systems still eventually fall victim to a small group of human beings hoarding the tokens and rapidly consolidating power, as we saw mathematically happen with Curve Finance.
Is true financial equality and decentralization actually a technological problem that we can eventually solve by writing better, more complex code?
Or is the innate human drive to accumulate disproportionate power hoard resources and dominate a hierarchy a fundamental biological flaw in our DNA that no blockchain, no matter how elegant or decentralized, can ever fully erase?
Man, that is a heavy foundational question. Is the ultimate bug in the smart contract code, or is the bug in our own DNA?
That is something to seriously think about as we watch this new financial system get built in real time.
Listen, if this deep dive challenged you, if it made you think differently about the history of markets, about the societal expectations placed on you, or about your own internal psychology, you absolutely need to read the source material.
We strongly encourage you to review the book to support the author's message and dive into the data yourself.
Open up a browser right now, go directly to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and purchase Digital Wealth, A Rational Man's Blueprint for Crypto Success by Conrad Riker. Dive into his full analysis.
And do not forget to follow @Conrad Riker on Substack to stay continuously updated on his latest thoughts and market analysis.
The macroeconomic and technological landscape is shifting more rapidly than at any point in history, and as Riker thoroughly points out, the future belongs entirely to those who are educated and prepared to navigate it rationally.
Exactly, and we're here to help you do just that.
Thank you so much for joining us on this expensive deep dive today. Please take a second to give us a like, hit that subscribe button, and we will see you next time as we continue to critically decode the world's most important ideas and shifting paradigms. Stay rational out there.